July of 2011, along with my wife and youngest son, I moved from New York City to Luzern, Switzerland. It was precisely 100 years earlier that my grandmother had moved from Europe to the United States. And since she had come by ship, I thought I should return by ship. The accommodations were somewhat different, but after all, it's the thought that counts. More and more of my work was based in Europe, and we thought it would be easier to live in the center of Europe for a few years than the center of Manhattan. We were producing the Travels and Traditions series, which deals with history, culture, and gastronomy, and most of the cities we covered were in Europe. I was hosting a group of river cruises to help raise funds for the PBS stations, and all the ships sailed on the great rivers of Europe. In addition, we were beginning to develop a series called Art Cops, designed to help recover missing works of art. And once again, much of the work was in Europe. We knew that it would make sense to live in Europe for a few years, but we didn't know where. We looked at almost every country in Europe and every major city in each country. Luzern in Switzerland appeared to have a lot to offer. In terms of location and ease of travel, Luzern has an extremely efficient transportation system. The trip from the Zurich airport is only 60 minutes. Almost every hour there is a train to each of the major cities of Switzerland and 2 to the international airport in Zurich. Every day the trains leave and arrive at the same time and on the same track. Because of Luzern's location, I travel to almost all the cities in Central Europe by train. It's also up to date with its digital system. About 90% of the homes have a high-speed internet connection, and in many of the public areas there's a free Wi-Fi connection. Switzerland is divided into states called cantons. The city of Luzern and the surrounding canton is attractive as a center for business because of its location, the availability of almost 2 million mostly multilingual staff within 60 minutes commuting time, and business-friendly government programs to support development. The canton of Luzern is primarily a service economy with internationally known brands in automotive, construction, machinery, pharmaceuticals, and food. The political and financial stability of Luzern and Switzerland in general make it an ideal place to do business. My first and perhaps biggest surprise was discovering the relationship between the people of Luzern and their government. In many of the countries I have lived in, I often felt that dealing with the government was an adversarial relationship. In Luzern, the government personnel I encountered were polite, helpful, and efficient. I was so impressed that I arranged an interview with the governor to find out what was going on. And what I found out was that the people who work for the government are trained to understand that their salary is paid by the people who come to them for assistance, and it is their primary obligation to help them in every way they can and with the greatest courtesy. Since most of my work for public television was going to take place in Europe, I wanted to set up a television production company, and putting it in Luzern made the most sense. It's a small company, 10 people when we were at full strength. But instead of being treated like an insignificant operation, everyone in the Luzern business community pitched in. They helped us get the necessary government permits, which turned out to be considerably easier than renewing my driver's license in New York. They helped us find a place to live and space for our office. One good option was the D4 Business Center, which has its own train stop that connects to the Zurich airport. It has ready-made modern offices, 2 restaurants, and a kindergarten. More than 2,200 employees are working on this business campus, which was designed for small and medium-sized Swiss or international companies. There's also the Techno Park Luzern, a business incubator of technologically oriented startup companies. South of the city, and a 2-minute train ride to the main station in Luzern, is a new development with over 280 apartments. Switzerland has an interesting work ethic. By law, everybody is entitled to 4 weeks of paid vacation a year.
A while back, though, there was a referendum suggesting that they have 6 weeks of vacation. Well, it was defeated. The people felt that 4 weeks was quite enough, and that the additional 2 weeks might damage the companies they work for or have a negative effect on the nation's competitiveness.
The local government in Luzern is always trying to improve their relationships with the companies that have set up their European headquarters in Luzern. Every few months, the directors of Luzern Business Development invite people from business, cultural, and educational organizations to come to an informal cocktail party to talk about what's working properly and what the government could improve. They also set up lunches for 3 or 4 people to talk about their experiences and what they need the government to do to make life easier for expats. I made 3 suggestions that were immediately implemented. The government of Luzern is actually listening, far out. In many ways, Luzern is one of the most business-friendly cantons. There's a combination of market access, modern infrastructure, an efficient talent pool, and lower operating costs. There's also a competitive real estate market. In fact, I am also somewhat puzzled by my local bank. There are 2 living human beings who answer the phone in Luzern and know my name and my wife's name and my son's name. Almost all of our dealings with the bank are by email and telephone. But when we do visit the bank, it is usually as a family, and they remember my son's preference for non-carbonated apple juice as opposed to carbonated apple juice, which keeps him occupied during the visit. And I am probably one of their smallest accounts. In keeping with the international aspects of modern business, the city of Luzern maintains a sister relationship with the city of Chicago, which is of considerable importance to me because my mother-in-law lives in Chicago. The canton of Luzern maintains a partnership relationship with the Jiangsu province in China, which is one of China's strongest economic regions. And once again, I have a personal connection to Jiangsu. Jiangsu is a coastal state with a long history of great fish dishes. One of my favorite recipes is snapper in sweet and sour sauce, Jiangsu style. Luzern is the business, tourist, and cultural epicenter of central Switzerland. Its attraction is the result of the beauty of the old town, the natural splendor that surrounds it, and what it offers for any business that moves here. Luzern was built at the northwest corner of Lake Luzern, at the point where the Russ River flows into the lake. The entire city is encircled by the Alps. People have been living in, on, and around the Alps for over 10,000 years. The ancient Romans wrote about the people who lived in these mountains. The most important were the Helvetians. During the 400s, as Rome fell, German tribes took control of the northern part of Switzerland. The Burgundians from France conquered western Switzerland, but the Helvetians, high up in their central mountain villages, remained free and unaffected by much of Europe's history. This is an extraordinarily beautiful part of the world and relatively unspoiled. During the Middle Ages, Luzern was a simple fishing village, but when the St. Gothard Pass connecting northern Europe and Italy opened in the 1200s, Luzern became a major staging area. During the early 1800s, English poets showed up in Luzern and began describing the beauty of the nearby lakes and mountains. The British upper class, always ready for a holiday abroad, made Luzern a major tourist attraction. Luzern's 650-foot roofed bridge is probably the oldest roofed bridge in Europe. Called the Chapel Bridge, it was originally built in the 1300s as part of the city's fortification. The triangular roof supports were used by 17th century painters to present the history of Luzern and the patron saints of the city. There are over 100 images. The water tower alongside the bridge was built in the 1300s. Originally, it was a lighthouse on the top, a dungeon at the bottom, and a torture chamber in the middle. Reminds me of my first apartment. Lucern's old town is filled with ancient decorated buildings. The paintings present the history of the guild, or a family, or a special event. This building is the site of the first pharmacy in Luzern. It opened in 1530. The sign over the door reads, "There is no herb that will cure lovesickness." And if there was one, it wouldn't be covered by your insurance. A few streets away is the Lion Monument, which commemorates the 800 Swiss soldiers who died defending King Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette during the French Revolution.
The royal family had been attacked by the mob, but as soon as the king was able to make a deal with the leaders and felt that his person was safe, he told the Swiss guards to put down their weapons, at which point they were all murdered by the revolutionaries. A classic sellout.
Mark Twain visited this monument and called it the saddest piece of stone in the whole world. Just down the river from the monument is the Baroque Jesuit church built in the middle 1600s. Baroque architecture was a Roman Catholic response to the simple architecture of the Protestant Reformation. The Pope wanted to send a message that Catholic heaven was a big, magnificent, and ornate place, and much more fun than whatever was being offered by Martin Luther. The robes of Nikolaus von Flue, Switzerland's only patron saint, rests here. Von Flue's major act was to propose an agreement that regulated the division of spoils among Switzerland's mercenary troops, which is a story in itself. The economy of the Alpine village was based on small herds of cows and sheep and light farming. But with no natural resources, the economy was marginal. Since the farm work could be done by women and children, the men were able to go off and find other work.
And the work that they found was soldiering for pay. For hundreds of years, the Swiss fought other people's battles for a fixed salary and a share of the loot. It was an important source of foreign income. But in order to be able to offer their soldiers to one country without being attacked by another country, they instituted a policy of neutrality and offered their troops on an impartial basis. If you had the money, they had the men. It was an early form of migrant labor and very important to the history of the nation.
Switzerland no longer earns income from sending out troops. What it does do is bring in tourists. Modern package tourism got started right here in 1893 when Thomas Cook organized a group trip from England. That first tour, and much of the tourism since then, has been based on the beauty of the Swiss mountains and our desire to see what was happening on top. A 20-minute drive south of Lucerne will put you at the foot of Mount Pilatus, or you can get there from the city of Lucerne on steamboat, which is my favorite method of transportation. One of the steepest cogwheel railways in the world will take you to the top, which is 7,000 feet above sea level. People have always been fascinated with mountain peaks. The ancient Greeks believed that their gods lived on a mountain. Many societies that live near mountains put their temples on top of them. They're also a good spot for meteorological and geological observations or to check on your neighbors. But Mount Pilatus was not always available to visitors. For centuries, local residents believed that the mountain was inhabited by dragons, and if you disturbed them, they would send down storms and great floods. In 1585, a parish priest from Luzern and a courageous group of parishioners ascended Mount Pilatus and challenged every lake and cave where the dragons were thought to dwell. The priest returned to Luzern and announced that the spell had been broken. The spirits were at peace, and guided tours would soon be available at a modest price. Luzern is also one of the most important centers for music. It has a year-round program of music, including classical concerts, brass bands, and a blues festival. The Swiss Museum of Transportation is considered a historic and cultural institution. It is an interactive museum that traces the history of transportation. There are areas devoted to railroads, highways, cable, aviation, and space. And just to keep things hopping, every February, Lucerne presents one of the most unusual and colorful carnivals in Switzerland. In April, there's an international comics festival, presenting works from independent and opinionated artists working in dozens of countries throughout the world. There's a Summer Nights Festival with an outstanding display of fireworks, and in November, a blues festival. Okay, so what are the drawbacks? Not everyone speaks English, but that's true for New York. You can get around rather well without speaking Swiss German, but it's a good idea to learn it. At the time this program was filmed, I was unable to find a decent bagel. The natural beauty of the environment can interfere with your ability to concentrate on work, unless you are a ski instructor. The Swiss are the world's largest per capita consumers of chocolate. Prepare to become part of that statistic.
Well, that's the Swiss city and canton of Luzern, one of the nation's best kept secrets. But now that I've told you all about it, it's not very much of a secret. For Travels and Traditions, I'm Bert Wolf.